When we who live in Bedford town see maple leaves come drifting down, we give a thought to old John Haynes, who loved their shade in country lanes. And when we pass that noble row of giant spruces crowned with snow, we see again the little hedge friend would set out by highway's edge. They knew they'd never live to see this full-bloom glory of each tree, left heritage of beauty rare to me their unknown grateful heir. My name is Sam Griff, and this is the story of the Woodpile.
Well, let me see. The first member of the Wood family to live at Braewold was James Wood I. And in 1809, he purchased 225 acres from Samuel Palmer. And prior to that, he and his wife Martha had been farming and blacksmithing in the Newcastle area. They had been quite prosperous, so they bought a substantial farm. It was important to them that it had already been farmed because the land had already been cultivated. There were farm buildings there already, and also because the blacksmithing, they wanted to be near to a major highway. And Braewold was very near the highway that connected Bedford to Sing Sing, which was a major Hudson River port, present-day Ossining. So, 1809.
The interesting thing was families were large then, and if you had like 8 kids, that wasn't unusual. But what happened also in the Revolutionary War is because Bedford was the center line of the division between what we call patriots, those who wanted to have America, and loyalists who were loyal to England. And so what would happen is families would divide up, and they'd actually fight against each other to win the war.
James I's father, Samuel, was a loyalist during the Revolution, and he had land somewhere, maybe in North Castle. And anyway, at the conclusion of the war, all the loyalists had their land confiscated.
No persons that have been over to the enemy shall come into town to reside. If they have already come in, they are to be immediately drove out.
So James, maybe his heritage, what he would have gotten from his parents, was taken away, and then Samuel was banished to Nova Scotia, and his wife Amy chose not to go with him, and 6 of the children, including James, chose not to go. So James was sort of left up to his own devices now, and that's when he went to live with Martha and Joseph Thorne on their farm.
They were Quakers, and they started continued their Quaker family life with a meeting house that was put up in Chappaqua. And then James Wood, at that time, James, we'll call him the first, bought a farm on Croton Lake Road. And it was at this location in the year 1809 that the story of the Woodpile begins.
James II was the youngest by quite a bit of 7 children. And so his 3 older brothers were quite a bit older, and they left Braewold, they left the farm even before James II was born.
Henry was the first one of these boys, and he joined the Underhill Dairy Company. It would be another decade before Henry came back to Croton Lake Road to build his Brambleworth, which is one of the key houses in the Woodpile. So of the existing Woodpile houses, that would be the first one to have been built. It has the same architecture, basically, as it had then. Henry, who was the owner, was a gentleman farmer it says, quite fastidious of family history, which he was. He was a Quaker minister as well, and quite the, quote, Renaissance man. Henry and his second cousin wife, Mary Jane Underhill Wood, raised their 3 children. And Henry's, his wife died, and Henry's second wife, Caroline, added a little bit to the house. It was a rear section that got added. The character of the house is so unique, regardless of whether it's part of the Woodpile. It's just a very unique home.
Brambleworth was completed in 1847 to plans drawn by Alexander Jackson Davis, who was a well-known architect of the time. He had a book called Country Cottages, of which this house is one of. I believe the Wood family wanted to have something unique that stood out to show that, they were a prosperous family, and a very prestigious architect at the time was the way to show that. We moved in September 22nd, 98. Well, I grew up in Bedford, and I remembered it from when I was a kid. We all thought it was a scary house, and we didn't know who lived here. Natalie opened up the Sunday Times, and there was a little picture on the lower right, and it was this house. And our dream house was a stone house with a cottage and a pool in Bedford on a quiet road. So I recognized the house from when I was a kid, and that Monday morning we went to the agent, and the agent said they had an acceptable offer. So I turned around and she said, no, acceptable, not accepted. So then a small bidding war occurred with us and 2 other people, and about 10 days later, when they opened the envelopes, somehow we got the house. So we're very excited. The Rubens were the prior owners here. He was a professor at Cooper Union, and the house was in apparently rough condition when they purchased it. And they had a restoration school down at Lyndhurst, and it's the same architect as Lyndhurst, A.J. Davis. And apparently he made a deal with them where the students could come here and kind of practice on restoration. So they actually rebuilt the chimneys up top, which are a signature Davis item, the 3 chimneys like that. And they did some faux painting in the dining room. So we came here on my birthday in '98. It was a 100-degree day, and we were moving in, and came from an air-conditioned house, and it was awful in here. So we started putting air conditioning in later, but we found these floor registers in the coal bin. There were about a dozen of them, and they were down there so long they were actually rusted into a big pile. So we separated them all out, sandblasted them, painted them, and used them for ducted air conditioning. So they brought it up to a standard, and then as they got older and things started to go, and when we came in '98, it was once again pretty rough. Needed a lot of work.
I'll tell you this, my husband bought a pickup truck when he realized how much stuff we'd have to get rid of.
The plans for the house are apparently at Columbia. They were donated by the Slobums, which is 2 owners ago. And we saw a copy of them someplace in the house. We found something, and the dining room is labeled the laying out room. So apparently that's where you put Grandma and Grandpa when they passed away for some period of viewing. And when we were cleaning out the coal bunker down below, which was full of all kinds of junk, bear traps and everything, we found these 2 poles. They were square with nice handles carved on the end, and they were black and very ornate on the side with like a gold paint. And I took them out. There were 2 of them, and I said, what on earth are these for? And apparently those were for carrying Grandma and Grandpa out in their coffin. So that was surprising. And,
Yeah.
and the plans do say laying out room. The house originally ended at this wall here, so it was kind of compact and tall, so there really wasn't a formal dining room.
The kitchen was downstairs, so there's an
yeah.
original kitchen.
And then the back
hearth,
portion was built in 1890, was added.
and all the stone is from here. It was carved on site.
Yeah.
You can actually see a difference in the stone with the addition to the side here because it wasn't the same
Yeah, it wasn't in the same
location.
place.
Yeah. We wanted to put in a TV room, so there's, they call it an English basement, so there are windows down there, even though it's in the basement, and we wanted to replicate what we have in the rest of the house with these shutters that close entirely, so without having curtains, you can make it really dark for the TV. And anytime we do something like that, I would copy, what's already existing, these pocket windows in the living room and dining room, and I would sort of say to myself, well, hopefully this ghost A.J. Davis is happy with what we're doing, because I was really trying, without a degree in architecture, just resources, and trying to be honest with, what the time period would have called for.
Davis was apparently somewhat avant-garde in his, not only the design, but the function of the house. The walls are made where there's an air gap between the stone and the plaster, so you can get ventilation from the basement all the way up to the peak and then out the peak to keep the air in the house fresher.
We had a guy here who was a master carpenter who helped with a lot of the projects, and he had the idea of going into our attic, and the attic had the original pine floors, same as this wide. So we actually cut pieces from the attic because it's all carpeted anyway up there, and we just decided, so they had been painted, I think, weren't they gray?
They were painted
so
gray,
we just stripped them, and
this is actually that wood, and
100% because it's the same. It was done at the same time.
And then we used the reclaimed wood in the basement. That's right.
Right.
And we took some wood out of the basement, but the basement, all the chippings from the stone were thrown in the foundation as a base, and then they took trees, split them in half, and laid them with the split side up and nailed boards to them. So it was very musty. There were a lot of mice down there, and roots growing all the way into the middle of the house. When we pulled it all up, it was quite a mess. The stone cutting took quite a while. Apparently it was a two-year build.
We're told that all the stone came off the property, but these pieces were actually purchased because they were so large.
All split and star drilled by hand to form the exterior. And if you open up a wall in here, everything from the exterior in is basically rubble. They made the outside very pretty and very chiseled, and then the inside is just whatever they had laying around. They just formed the wall. The walls, you go down to the basement, and we had to do some waterproofing. They were 39 inches thick, and when you go all the way up to the attic, they're 12 inches thick, so it's actually battered to give it strength because it's obviously not reinforced in any way.
So original back door of the house, and this is the actual thickness of the stone wall and back on the back wall.
Well, our first day moving in here, I know it's not in your questions, but it's a family of 4. People before us were elderly, probably did one load of laundry, a week. And we came in and used bathrooms and laundry and, whatever. We were settling in, moving in. It was a really warm September. And all of a sudden we ran out of water. And we didn't realize that it was a cistern in the back, and we had run it dry. Toilet was running, I don't know, whatever. So we were actually jumping in a swimming pool to shower. There was a party.
We lost the well basically the first day, and we lost the septic field the next week.
We really got our initiation. But what I was going to say is Mrs. Wood, Twink Wood, who I'm sure is included in this story of the Woodpile, she showed up at the front door with a friend, and she had found out, I guess she had heard through the grapevine, through the
new
local,
people had no septic.
that we had no water, no septic. And she's a dowser. She was a dowser. So I had never seen somebody do this except maybe on TV. And we had the kids outside, and we all took coat hangers, and she had her friend with the rods, and they were dowsing in our backyard.
Looking
Like
for
day
the-
two, we
looking
were
for the
here.
septic tank.
So Ted looked a little like, this is a little kooky, but she was lovely, and then invited us, to their house later. And her garden was not, this was an industrial garden. She had, a beautiful garden, and very welcoming. But that was an eye opener, and we had fun. The memory's so crystal clear in my head because we had literally not even unpacked our bags. And my version of the story is that she did find the water. Ted has a more pragmatic story to it, but my story is that she put the flags out in the back, and that's where the septic lines were.
Well, sort of the more scientific thing was the pipes were under the basement, and we had to find a spot that was lower than the basement, and that was down the hill over there.
Anyway, but it was fun. She was a very nice neighbor.
It started a very long relationship with them, and they were always there for us, and Jim still is, and he appreciated that we were trying to put the house the way it should be, and because he remembered running around here when he was a kid. His uncle owned this house.
Henry Wood.
That this was the first of the wood houses, and he wanted to see it preserved. We found a prayer in this wall from 18 something.
Well,
that was like you could barely touch it.
it's just over and over and over. Courage should ever be the champion of justice.
So
But the
dry.
funny thing is, every time we'd open like the floor in the attic, that kind of a thing, everyone would joke with us, because this is over 10, 15 years, did you find any treasures yet? I guess people think that there would be some gold pile somewhere behind a wall or in a floor. And when we did take up some of the flooring in the attic, there was a baby's shoe, an infant's shoe, and
A little candelabra.
a little candelabra, and then kind of junk, which maybe some mice might have brought around or whatever. But I did read later, and now I'm questioning if it's correct, it was considered good luck to put a shoe in the wall. So I don't know if that's true. You can look up that fact. Who knows at the time, they probably did have a lot of superstitions, but it was just one baby shoe. I don't know
We
where it
also
is.
found lithographs.
No treasure
of-
though, by the way. That's the punchline. Not yet.
You gotta go to the foundation.
Not yet.
We found lithographs in the attic of Henry Wood and his wife from the 1800s when they were a little older, and I was up in the attic and I was crawling through and I was covered with dirt and cobwebs and everything else, and the doorbell rang, and we just found those lithographs that morning, and I came downstairs and I was filthy dirty. I opened the door and there was a minivan outside and about a half a dozen people standing there, and the man said to me, "Oh, hi, I'm Henry Wood. My great-great-grandfather built this house." And I said, "Oh my God," I said, "I just found lithographs of your great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother." And I ran upstairs and I got him, and he was just blown away. And I felt that, the family should have them. So we gave it to them. And they were from Virginia, and they were up here, and they just wanted to see the house. So we walked around and showed them what we were doing. And it was, it was a very interesting moment in the house's history for us.
So when we arrived here, when I saw these beautiful mature trees, and it's not a large lot, we're 2 acre, but it's amazing the variety of trees we have on the property. And we were told at the time that it was Frederick Law Olmsted that had designed a lot of actually this whole area. But then when we started looking, it's more likely that it was, is it Charles Downing?
A.J. Downing.
A.J. Downing.
Who collaborated with A.J. Davis.
Yes, so when we started buying books about A.J. Davis, this kept coming up. There was no connection with Frederick Law Olmsted, but A.J. Downing worked or had worked or studied with Frederick Law Olmsted. So, a lot of the feeling of the properties that you can see next door, the same feeling, and I guess maybe a little bit at Jim and Twink's house. I don't know.
All three houses.
All 3 houses. But we've had people come, arborists, and apparently we have some specimen trees The one that's right out here. What's
Yeah,
it
on the
called?
side is called a lily of the valley or a sourwood, and some arborists came here to see it, and they said it's the largest one in Westchester County. When they added this on, this area right in here was a pantry that you came in from the kitchen. And when we were up here working, we found about a 12 by 6 by 6 cistern made out of huge oak timbers up here that was lined with 1,000 pounds of lead sheeting. We ended up taking the lead down, and in this pantry was a chain that was up in the ceiling here. When you pulled the chain, it would open up a valve to let the water from the cistern, come down and be used. You can see the original fireplace with the W on it from the Wood family. The deck that used to be very Victorian. So we found the old balusters in the basement and incorporated them into a repair here. There were no rails, so we had these rails done, with a little Gothic design to it. After coming from a very poorly built, modern builder's box, vertical cedar, house with very little curb appeal, it was stunning to live in a house that has, beauty to it and history to it, and a famous architect from the past, and it made us very proud to put it back in order.
If you had the three sons were Henry, James, and John J. Wood. And John J. is another one of the Wood boys descended who built Evergreen Lawn. And that was built in 1855, I believe.
In 1856, John J. Wood, 1821 to 1884, built this home on land purchased from his father, Stephen Wood, 1792 to 1876. Stephen inherited the entire farm from his father, James Wood, 1762 to 1852. James acquired the property when he removed from Newcastle to Bedford in 1809. Elizabeth Runyon Howe, granddaughter of John J. Wood, inherited the home in 1912. 3 generations were married in the house between 1873 and 1937, and the 8th generation, in unbroken succession, is living on this land in 1948. I'm Andrea Herron. My husband Harvey Eisen and I are the owners of this house, which is 666 Croton Lake Road, originally called Evergreen Lawn by John J. Wood when he built it in 1856. It then went through a renaming when they had a rather more erudite relative owned it, and he named it Sir Wood, which it was named until we bought it in 1991. And we went back to the original name of Evergreen Lawn because I had no idea what Sirwood meant until Twink Wood explained to me it meant surrounded by woods. There was woods on that side and woods on this side. Wood family members. So we bought it in 1991, and at that time the house number was 654 Croton Lake Road. When they went through the 911 changeover, they renumbered it as 666 Croton Lake Road, which concerns some people. We bought the house from Arthur Ashe and his wife, Jeannie Ashe, who was a photographer. Arthur Ashe was the very famous tennis player, and he had retired and he wanted to become a country gentleman. So they bought the house probably around 1985, 1986. A family named McLaughlin had owned it from the mid-50s to those mid-80s. And they had tons of kids. There were a lot of bedrooms in this house because the entire third floor was built as servants' bedrooms. and they had about 6 kids, so this was great for them. The Ashes did quite a few things to the house, and most of them were needed, but they got a bad contractor initially who wasn't very good. And since they had been in the city the whole time and dealing in the city, that they weren't aware of some of the things you can run into in the country. And so we can sort of tell when the bad contractor left and the good contractor came in, because the quality of work was hugely different. He just put a thin strip of wood all along where the crown molding would have been. And it's so obvious when you see it, you can't unsee it. We had been looking, and we had rented a little house over in Katona, and we had been looking for about 5 years and just didn't find anything that we really wanted. And we had moved from a Southern California beach house overlooking all of Los Angeles Bay. We didn't realize it, but we were looking for a big view and a sunset view. And that's what we found here. I had grown up on the East Coast, Harvey grew up in the Midwest, so I was really aware of old houses. My family mostly came from around Boston. So I knew what we were getting into, in a way, meaning that we didn't know what we were getting into. We were going to get a lot of surprises. And it was, so that I was really expecting, and I'd be excited. I would learn like the interior walls of this house are brick, covered with plaster, just like the outside is brick covered with plaster. But you'll have a hard time finding interior walls. Every single interior wall is brick. So you can imagine the radio waves and television frequencies going through, they don't go through. So we have wires all over the place. And you have to get special guys who really know what they're doing, because before, when the McLaughlin family, who had been here from 1955 to about mid-80s, decided to retire, I think, to Maine, and they sold the house, Jim Wood bought it because he lives right next, he lived right next door. And his primary purpose in buying it was to move Wood Road, because at that point in time, it was very, very close to their house. And you can see it if you go down to the end of his property, about where the greenhouse is, and look up, you'll see a tree and then their house. Maybe it's a bush in their house. But if you look at that and think, my God, they were like, everybody was going within a couple of feet of their house. So he bought the house from the McLaughlins, and it did need a lot of cleanup, because Mr. McLaughlin did tell me that, he said, whenever we got any money, we took a trip. I didn't put it into anything. So it was way overgrown, and it needed a lot of work. Anyway, Jim bought it so that he could move Wood Road away from his house. Emily Wood Crowfoot, Jim's daughter, lived across the street in the little cottage down by the pond. In true Wood family tradition, she could drive the tractor, and she did when she needed to. One of the horses died up in the field, so Emily, had to do something about it. So she got on her tractor, and she decided to dig a hole and then get the tractor and move the horse into the hole. And unfortunately, when she went to dig, with the big tractor, she ran right through the electric line that went into the whole house and shut everything down there. So it was always a big joke with Emily. Don't let her take care of the dead horse. One of the most interesting parts was when we moved here and we discovered it was just something they did. They had a big flagpole in their front yard, and normally it would have an American flag. They were always getting relatives visiting. So depending on what relative was visiting, you would have the flag of Australia, of New Zealand, of the UK. You never, but you could just look over and say, oh, okay, who's visiting them now?
What are we looking at?
What are we looking at? Okay, this is the earliest picture I have of the house. And there's no screen porch on either side there. And there is a front porch, which we don't have anymore. That was all changed. We think it probably changed in the early 1900s, somewhere between 1900 and the 1930s. And that was still, the Wood family was still in the house then. So then, this is the way it looked when the Arthur Ashe had it. And they kind of went for now you can see the porches on either side. And this is where the changes we made were to the windows in this funny little add-on, 2-story add-on. That I know the upstairs originally had been a bedroom for the nanny, because this bay window bedroom had been the children's nursery. And Emmeline does write about it in this little write-up that she did for us when she was, for when she was growing up. That the children lived in the nursery, they ate every meal in the nursery. So that was kind of cool. And then, so we did fix this up. We put in better heating, we put in better windows, and made a really nice library. And now it's half of it's a bathroom and half of it's a little office. Emily had said when she was a baby, because she was the first one born, and when she came home from the hospital, her father took her down to the pond, and they had that was providing all the water for Braewold, and told her how important this was. She had to really understand, this teeny baby, right? Really understand how important this whole water system was. The things you learn. Everybody always wondered why and how Arthur Ashe could live without a tennis court. And he did have one. But unfortunately, someone before him had sold off the other half of the tennis court, so he would be left with effectively a half a court. So I believe he played at the sawmill with a friend.
James II, who in 1839 was born, and this is a character, if you will, or a key person who really did so many things for the Wood family. In 1866, he would marry Emily Hollingsworth Morris, and they would rebuild Braewold in 1870. Now, Braewold was really one of the original houses, but it burned down. So they got rebuilt in 1870.
I bought the house in 2007. It was a very serendipitous situation, actually. I had decided to rent a home. I had 2 young kids for the summer, and I had never been to Westchester, let alone Bedford before, but I'd heard it was a nice place. So I looked around on the internet, and I found a rental house near the little village of Bedford. A few weeks into the rental, things just kept getting worse and deteriorating at the other house. So I got the kids into the car one evening. It was probably 5 or 6 o'clock on a summer evening. And we just started to drive around, and we found the east end of Wood Road and turned onto a beautiful dirt road, and we're sort of getting somewhat acquainted with the geography of the area. Just as we were entering the driveway, literally behind me is a man on a yellow tractor. It's now about 7 o'clock, 7:30. It's starting to get dark. My kids jumped out of the car, went rolling down the hills, doing tumble salts, finding frogs. I've never seen them happier. And the man gets off of his tractor, turns the engine off, and comes up to me and he says, "Hi, I'm Jim." I said, "Nice to meet you, Jim. I'm Eric." And he said, "Can I help you?" And I asked him if it was true that his house was for sale. And he said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Well, I'm looking around for something. Can you tell me about it?" And he proceeded to explain a little bit about what was to be this incredible home and this incredible person. He asked me a bunch of questions about my life, and he saw the kids reveling in the yard and having the time of their lives, and there was an arch over there with a big bell, and on the bell was inscribed the name Ivan, which is my son's name, and it was just a coincidence. And the fact that my children immediately gravitated towards the environment and literally fell in love with it, I couldn't get them back for at least a couple hours. So during those 2 hours or so, Jim and I were talking, and he was starting to explain the history of the place, and I became more and more enamored with what I was hearing. And one thing led to another, and I said, "Listen, I don't normally do these things, but this is too good to be true, and I would love to become the custodian of this house, because I really don't think this is a house that anybody should or would ever own. I think occupy and conserve is a duty and an honor, and I think of this as a potential center of gravity for my family and their kids and further generations, just as he had for, I believe, 7 generations. So we had this common vision. I immediately became so curious about the history, and I said I'd like to commit to buying it before somebody else buys it, because I'm sure they will. And I hadn't inspected it. I really didn't understand what I was getting into, but I knew that I was in real estate, so worst case, it would become a project, and it looked like more than an interesting one. So I reached into my pocket. I found that I was carrying around $40 or $50 in cash. I gave it to Jim. I said, "Will this suffice as a deposit?" And he said, "This plus a handshake will suffice as a deposit." So we shook hands, and I agreed to buy the house. I really am looking around, and I don't know that I'll be able to care for this house in the way it needs to be cared for. So I've got to find somebody to live here. There were 3 houses, each with their own address, and I've got to find somebody that will be willing to live here and be the full-time caretaker. And my daughter was taking riding lessons at Sunnyfield at the time, and I remember Sunnyfield was absolutely beautiful. green pastures and well kept, and the barns were perfect. I said, who takes care of this beautiful place? So somebody said a gentleman named Steve Krolik. Long story short, he gets hired and moves in, and we take over, and it was as if a chapter had turned in my life, and this house now became sort of the center of gravity for me and the way I looked at my priorities, and I could never stop thinking about what this house was about. So Jim and his friends at the time continued to spend a lot of time here. He threw a big party, I remember, for me and my family, and all the neighbors came. There were about 50 or 100 neighbors, and he played tennis here every week with his friends, and I would wake up on a Saturday morning and he would be in the back door coming by to talk, and I guess we spent hundreds of hours over the years sharing stories and educating me on everything. And the most special part about it, the whole thing, was the fact that he and his wife Twink were downsizing and moving to Sleepy Hollow, so they didn't have any room to keep any of their antiquities or any of the things that the family had collected over the generations. And being Quaker, these were not things that were collected. These were things that were utilitarian in nature. So they had the first of everything. And they literally left all of it in the house. So immediately I became aware that this was not a normal situation. This was a living museum to the 19th century lives of 7 or 8 generations of one family that just kept peeling layer after layer that I kept peeling layer after layer of and learning more about. And I really feel that this was fated and enormously fortunate and lucky to have found this place, because if it had come to me in any traditional way, it would never have the same meaning, nor do I think I would ever have found myself in a position to purchase it. Jim, interestingly, had really lived a double life for many years. He worked for the Bank of New York as a banker during the week, and on the weekends he was a farmer. The problem was that it had been so overwhelming for Jim that a lot of the buildings were literally falling down. So we just had to rebuild them and keep them going and find a purpose for them that would be useful for us. So the way we look at the property is sort of a two-way property. Well, this is the luxurious part, which has been fixed up for the 21st century, and that side is the preserved historical part of the farm. And I think what makes this place so special is the ability to keep both parts of the property working. If you look at all these beams here, these are all the old original hand-hewn beams that we've repurposed, or not repurposed, they're in the same position they were always in. But we insulated it and we kept it as it was from a structural standpoint, but made it into a basketball court with a full gym up there, which if you step back just a few feet, you can see it's a great workout area with a great view. So this is kind of fun, and I think quite a unique space. You can see at the very top, there's still the track for the hay bales that used to go across. That we got loaded in, and the hay bales would fly on those wheels. There's a wheel right there on the ceiling that still works, and the hay would go wheeling from one end of the barn to the other. So it's kind of neat to see the repurposing of this building. This is the machine barn. So this is a very good depiction of the condition of all the buildings when we bought it, and you can see they're barely standing up. So the next stage of the renovation is to literally rebuild these buildings exactly in accordance with the way they look now. But this is the sort of the most utilitarian work. But if you can see this old wood and the stone and the beams, all of this is absolutely 100% original. And I just love it. So let's take a look. If you walk back here, you can see the condition of the stuff. We're trying to keep it alive as best as we can and take it away. This is the stairway from the bottom that we just came up. And if you look at these beams, for example, these are what we call hand hewn. So before they had any machinery close to large enough to saw these straight, they would take a little axe and chip them until they resembled quasi-straight beam. Look at all of these kinds of things that they did, post and beam. It's all still here. What's so fascinating to me is that the wood that you see here, every inch of it is hand cut and handmade. So to try to preserve it as best as possible is the goal. It was funny, the first couple of days after the closing, or before the closing, I don't remember exactly, they had a big estate sale. What they held aside was a lot of the things that were personal to the family, and as a result, fascinatingly interesting to me. So for example, we had a lot of things that were hand-signed to the Wood family, a lot of their photo albums. They did a lot of traveling. The family traveled by boat all over Egypt, Morocco, Italy, and we took some of the pictures, Palestine, Rome, of their travels. They left all these photos for us. And I took some of the ones that I thought were the most interesting, framed them, and hung them all around. And we still have literally hundreds of them. If you look over here, you could see some of the photos of the pyramids. These are the Sphinx. This is a snake charmer in Egypt. All of these were photos from the family heirlooms of photos of their exploits and their travels. They were very prolific, incredibly interested in everything. So they traveled all over the place. And travel in those days was very hard. They were very English, right? So they had books that described the British perspective on travel to these remote, then very remote places, and the British sort of superiority. You know, this house was built without electricity or plumbing, so when things were invented, they were retrofitted into the house. So what we were able to see by just, for example, going down to the basement was the first and the second and the third generation of heating, and how it started out with coal and then it moved to oil and so on. So it really is the construction and the contents are a living museum to how the Industrial Revolution and the 19th century and into the 20th century really evolved. Is fascinating. The things that were used here were materials that were brought from England. Addison Hutton was the architect. Frederick Law Olmsted was the landscape architect with his son, John Frederick Olmsted, who were the landscape architects for Central Park. So a lot of the trees and shrubbery were not native to Westchester, and we first had to sort of catalog everything, all the books and things of that nature. So one thing that we're doing, for example, is we're going to be expanding on the museum, and they also had a history of making their own clothing, had a sewing room on the second floor. And they left behind about 40 different women's dresses. And in talking to the fashion director of the Metropolitan Museum and other people, there are experts, you know, a lot of which are based in the Northeast in clothing and a lot of these inventions. So getting deeper into the meaning and the exact purpose and the way clothing was made is the next step. So the goal that we have is to set up a working museum where this will be a place for young people to come, people of all ages actually, and see how corn was husked by the original corn husker, which we still have. They took the kernels from the corn to feed the cattle. It was really cattle corn that they were growing. This toboggan here is where they took the 50-pound cubes of ice from the pond down Wood Road into the root cellar. These are all this was like the gully where what's interesting to me about these stables too is you didn't have animal rights then, so a poor horse would be standing in a stall literally 4 or 5 feet wide and obviously kicking it pretty hard. It's pretty eroded. And then these things were accessible from the second floor, so the stable hands would drop hay at night into each of these 4 bins to feed the animals. So we kept all of the old stable walls, and we have the stable dividers as well. These are also winches that they used all over the property in various barns and things like that. Same with the chairs. These are side saddles, I think. This is a side saddle for a woman that was wearing a dress, so she wouldn't have to straddle the saddle. So they had special saddles for females and males. This is the world's first toilet right here. It was in the main house upstairs. So to empty it, you'd open it up, take the pot out, take it outside, clean it out, and bring it back up to the so-called master bathroom on the second floor, which is the only bathroom in the house, believe it or not. These were shoes and also bottles that we found on the hill when we were excavating the rock. We found these Pepsi bottles and soda bottles buried in the ground, which is kind of neat because they go back a long time. Pepsi Cola, I mean, you tell me when this Pepsi Cola bottle is from. So, you know, it's kind of cool that all this stuff was just sort of sitting in the ground. And these shoes were used to make shoes. They were molds that they used to make for each member of the family, and then they would just make shoes by wrapping leather around these pieces of wood and putting rubber soles on them. So they literally made everything and grew their own food, made their own clothes, made their own shoes, and were completely self-sufficient from top to bottom, which is kind of amazing to me. This right here is a concrete counterweight with a hook on the top that used to be in the basement of the main house. And this counterweight is the way they used to hang the granite brick and bring the granite up to erect the house. So they would attach ropes and lots of different winches to take the granite block and stack them up as they went higher and higher. And every 3 or 4 feet of elevation, they'd put a piece of wood to hold the cement, and then they would build another block on top, cut each one by hand with a chisel. And these weights came in various sizes. And this one just happens to be here. We've got 3 or 4 of those, and we're going to clean them up and put them back in order so people can understand how they work. It's endless. I just noticed the other day, in fact, there's hand-painted tile on the mantle in the fireplace in the library, and the mural that's painted on the tile is dated 1867. So to see these things, and I just discovered this a couple of days ago, it's just a constantly unfolding book of history is an indescribable feeling. I don't know that I can adequately represent it in the manner in which I'm explaining it. But when you see the way things were built then versus now, and you appreciate the lack of plans, and we have the plans that we used to build this house, they were concepts. They weren't exact. And when you see the level of craftsmanship and the thought process behind just starting with the layout of the house, not to mention the quality of the way things were built, so windows open with a pinky because of the lead weights on the sides, you don't see that anymore. And to have the ability to see the way things worked and the way things were built just gives you a whole nother level of appreciation for the craftsmanship and the quality that people brought to their trade. That building right there, if you look at it, is the original schoolhouse for the town of Bedford when it was the capital of New York State. For a very brief time, Bedford was the capital of New York State, and that end building was the Bedford School. And when we renovated it, that's where Steve lives now, we took all the walls down and we found that the beams had been carved with graffiti from the students in the Bedford School from 1650.
That's this building.
That's this building at the end, yeah. That's the original schoolhouse of the town of Bedford, New York. I hope soon that this property will be in a position to start to bring groups through and to show them in a more organized way. Once we've got everything, as you saw earlier, Sam, there's a lot of work we're doing on completing the restoration of the old wood and restoring many of the old books and antiquities and other things. I look forward to the day when we'll start having the ability to bring young people through the house. As the age of artificial intelligence continues to race ahead, this house will always be an opportunity to see the antithesis of that, and that's a dream come true for me.
There are the other houses would be Stonecrest, which is actually on the other side of the road from Brambleworth, and the owner there currently, Bob Saunders, and his wife Linda Mahan, who regrettably passed a few years ago, has done wonderful things to maintain it, changed the character a little bit, but did so in a manner that's historically interesting.
My name's Robert H. Saunders, and we are at a property that's called Stonecrest. Now, it was originally called Stonecrest. The second family to own the house called it the Bailey Motto, and we reverted to the original name when we bought it. And it's a early Queen Anne home, built in 1879 by an architect who was fairly prominent at the time, Eugene Clarence Gardner. He published a series of books, which I have over here, including The House that Jill Built, which includes this house. The house was built by Augusta Wood Underhill and Francis Underhill. The Woods built 5 landmark homes along this road. The first generation built 3 homes up the road, a Gothic Revival, an Italianate, and the Second Empire house. This was the first of the second generation homes. It was originally intended to be built on the Underhill family estate, which was at Croton Point on the Hudson River. Fortunately, it wasn't built there because the Underhill family estate became a dump, and it's now a park again, but the original Underhill house doesn't survive. And what happened was that for Christmas 1878, the Woods gave Francis and Augusta the land, some of the land for this house. So in 1879 it was begun to be built. I like historic homes, and I've always liked architecture. So I always wanted to have a home that I could come into and, if necessary, restore, which this certainly required, more than my late wife and I anticipated at the time. This house has only had 3 owners, 3 families owning it. The Wood Underhills initially. In 1917, the Mead family bought it. They did a lot of changes to the house, which were rather aggressive, but of indifferent quality. And they owned it until 1997 when we bought it. So they basically tried to turn the home into a colonial revival house, which is tough given the character of the house. Since, among other things, they removed the front porch and they removed a brick bay on the side of the house. Since we bought it, we have replaced the heating, put in air conditioning, redone the electrical, redone the plumbing, redone the kitchen and the bathrooms, put on a new slate roof, and done some interior renovations to revert to the original layout. We haven't gotten around to the front porch or the side bay, but perhaps at some point. The Meads took everything when they left. They took the light fixtures, they took the faceplates from the switches, which was fine because they were of poor quality, so we were going to replace them anyway. We didn't really mind it. I've installed a geothermal heating system, an air conditioning system, so that's what really heats the house in winter and cools it in the summer. We put back in the woodwork. The baseboard is original, and I have the original specifications for the house handwritten by the architect, so I know some of what he wanted. But we spent time putting this in, which is maple with Purple Heart inlay. We also put back in the sliding doors that the Meads had removed. They put in one big door that took up a lot of the room, and the sliding door seemed a much better way to deal with entering the room. So if you go through here, you can see on that side the door is maple with Purple Heart inlay. On this side it's white ash. The published drawing pictures of the house in the book I showed you, the house that Jill built in the Jackson Food Fair there, have a picture of the entry hall that showed stained glass in the bench in the entry hall. And so we took that as an indication of what we could do there. The stained glass that was in the picture was looked somewhat in a turban. So I think it was just the whimsy on the part of the architect drawing it. So we put in the Bedford oak for the stained glass. Floor plans that were published for the house. We are now about here. This was a serving station that people could pass food in from the kitchen. So we decided we needed a half bath on the first floor, so we closed it off into the dining room and made it into a bath. This is interesting because aside from the beadboard and the baseboard, this is the only original woodwork on the first floor in the house. Originally, there was a wall here, a door here, and this was a pantry, and there was a wall here, and this was an entry to a storeroom. When the architect published his The House That You Built, his book that included this house, one criticism he noted was that there was no servants there. So soon after the house was built, they put in a servant stair here. So this is an original, but I think it's fairly early. It would have been a coal stove, where the stove originally was. We turned it into a raised fireplace. When we bought the house, there was a wood stove down below here. Stairway, most of the woodwork is original. It was heavily painted, and we stripped all of it down. This was originally a bedroom. The maids turned it into a study, a library, so we left it that way. Originally, there would have been a door here opening up to a balcony above the bay. This was the original bathroom in the house. We re-renovated it. There's a steam shower now. This was supposed to be a servant's bedroom originally. When the house was built, it came right across here because there was no stairway. When the stairway was put in for the servants, they had to move the wall back a bit, which is why it's at an angle now.
And that goes down into the kitchen.
Right. So this is the third floor. If you go in here, this was the original water supply for the house. Runoff from the roof came down to a big lead-lined tank that was used for water. When we bought the house, we took out the lead for health reasons and turned it into a bathroom. This back hall originally would have had wood floors, but they were in too poor a condition to use, so we put in the tiling, which is also good when you come in with snowy boots. And caustic tiles, which just means multicolored tiles. They were popular in medieval times and also in the second half of the 19th century. Now you can see in terms of the stonework that the bottom, which is called random coarse rubble, which means squared stones not laid in even layers. And on top, you have random rubble, which means not squared stones. There was a one-story side porch here, and you can also see that the stonework here is of poorer quality because it was meant to be covered. No one would see it. This is where the brick bay would have been coming out of the sitting room. And this shows you presumably why the house is called Stonecrest. It's built on top of a crest of stone.
So you have Stonecrest on that side of the road. You have Brambleworth, Braewold on opposite sides of the wood road facing that direction. And then you have Airlie on the same side as another member of the Woodpile houses. It's really an extraordinary thing. They're on the National Register. They are definitely worth viewing, at least from the outside. If you can get in, that's great. And we're all very, very proud of that, and proud of Jim Wood. He's done so much in this town, and as did his wife Twink. Well, I think the key thing for people to think about, if they want to, is how the name Woodpile came about from the standpoint of everybody else thinking about it as, hey, the Wood family, their properties. And remembering that the first James Wood the first, and the second, and the third were all very much involved in organizations that they either started or maintained. And things like the Farmers Club, for instance, started in 1852. It's 174 years now, 172 years old, and still has that character. We had a meeting last week of the Farmers Club, and it's still very, very much part of this town. And there are other things like the town seal that James II created, which we live with all the time. So the impact of the family is just, and they're maintaining, or let's say, the structures that they all lived in being maintained. So yeah, we're all very proud of it. So glad to know them.
This is the Wall. It's quite a popular spot for people to come and watch the sunset. The rolling farmlands into the fields, the view of the pond, and just the vista is absolutely spectacular. Throughout making this project, I've come to appreciate all of the stories that surround us and all of the beauty that surrounds us. It's important to uncover these stories and share them with the world. Back when James Wood I bought Braewold in 1809, the southern border of the property ran along a property owned by a man named Elijah Mosman. 200 years later, I've discovered in making this project that my house is that house that was owned by Mr. Mosman. I'm really excited that I've been able to bring so many of these stories from these incredible people to you guys and to the public for viewing. It's a really beautiful thing to be able to uncover the extremely local history and the stories around us. I've been walking up the street to watch the sunset at the Wall for as long as I can remember. But now it has a bit more meaning to it, and I have a bit more insight into the people who live in the houses that look out onto the same view that we all look at as we watch the sun go down.